Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this June 2nd, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and you're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can catch my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. And if you can't listen to the show, then they also play it at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And then if you can't catch either of those two shows, like I tell you every day, we want you to listen. We get disappointed when you don't come to our show. Go to arcticbeacon.com to get not conspiracy theories, but remember this. The truth starts here, and that is something that I've said a long time, that leads me into what I want to do today. And really, I want to get into a discussion on what the news really is, what opinion news shows are all about, and how this has developed in America, and where I came from in journalism, starting out as the editor of my student newspaper in the university, and then moving into jobs in the daily newspapers, going to Rome and working as a correspondent then becoming so disillusioned with what was really going on and how the American press was basically nothing more than a mouthpiece for certain special interest groups. I want to get into that today, but first let me explain this. I hope you go back to some of my old shows in the last week or two. I've concentrated on some really good things going on in the natural health world and looking at it from a global point of view. So go back and catch a lot of those shows. Next week, by the way, then let's move forward. Next week I'm going to dedicate a whole week to two people. And we're going to try to get some, I just gave a speech the other day at a community center regarding the two people, well, mostly on one person that I'm going to feature next week, and the plight of religious freedom in this country and where it really stands, not what they tell you on the news, not what they tell you on mainstream or even on the internet stations. And this is a complex subject, but it really boils down to two things. Well, let me tell you next week. So come next week, because we're going to try to get some information out. We're going to try to get people more aware of what these two people have undergone for liberty, for justice, and for the American way. And these two people both have been imprisoned illegally. They shouldn't be there. And they've been targeted by what I call the Vatican-led New World Order. One targeted, that's Tony Alamo, for his spiritual religious views, and also his Bible-believing church has been persecuted in a way that shows me there is no freedom in this country of religion or freedom of spiritual worship if you don't fall in line with the Vatican and all of their Protestant churches that have fallen under their control. And that's obvious if you start looking into the ecumenical movement. So that is a major issue. And we're going to try to get Tony out of jail. I mean, the guy's been put there for 175 years. He's 83 years old. He's blind. If you look at his past, he's talked a lot of truth about what this organization is really about. And if you look back even to the 70s and 80s, what's going on today is exactly what he talked about. And when people come to me and they say, well, we have freedom of religion. Look, everybody can come here. Even, look at all the Catholics, look at all the Muslim church, look at everything. We are ahead of our time. No, I don't think so. This idea, it's like telling me that I'm a free citizen in this country because I'm told that by the talking heads. I'm told, oh, you're a free American citizen because you live here. But when you start digging deep, you're really not. It's just a guise. And the same thing goes with freedom of religion. If you want to get to that line of truth, you're immediately targeted, immediately labeled as a conspiracy theorist, and told to shut up or else. Second person, so we're going to deal next week with Tony Alamo. And I want to get a lot of people on this show. I want to even do some interesting calling around regarding what people think about this story. And I've tried to cover this thing for 10 years, stating the same thing over and over again because nobody else seems to, very few people in the media seem to want to touch this story with the 10-foot pole. And the reason is they would be going right up against the Pope, and that would be the end of them in their work in any kind of establishment media. Next person, Daniel, I believe, what's his name? Daniel Smith. He's the guy that was put in jail for distributing MMS, a natural product. Now he's spending 4 or 5 years in jail, and we're going to feature him. And if you put together people that want to get to natural medicine and do it the right way to keep your body healthy, and then you get to people like Tony Wamo who want to keep your spiritual life healthy, both of them have been attacked because the powers that be want you to be sick and want you to follow whatever they tell them. It's that simple. So we're going to spend next week doing that. But today I thought we would discuss, every now and then I like to get to the bottom of what the media really is all about, because most people don't have a clue. And I don't blame them because they don't work in it. And they just basically want to, you turn on a station, you want to get the truth, right? Well, you're not. And then when you try to get it, it's even getting more difficult on the internet because of the people that are working for the mainstream Vatican-led New World Order press that are doing it on the internet in a kind of a different way, a deceitful way of saying, hey, I'm giving you the truth, but they don't want to deal with the main issues. And let me explain this. Let's just start out by saying, I'm going to use myself as an example. This is not a news show. This is an opinion show. This is a show that takes a stance in a certain area and presents opinions regarding this area of discussion that we do on this show. And one thing that I've said to you is that we concentrate from an opinion point of view on the Vatican and its connections to the world governments. And what that means is it brings into play a lot of different things. It brings into play, in the case of the Vatican, most every aspect of your life. And it also talks about history, which Americans are very, very lacking a basic knowledge. They've been given a story in their history books like I was in college, and I've said many times, I want my money back from these universities who are teaching a false history or teaching a history that's been put there by mostly Jesuit education to skew story, to lead you to believe certain things that never really happened in history. And it's a twisted history that gives you gives you a false idea of really what happened. And if we repeat history, we make the same mistakes over again. And kind of like one writer once said, he said, most people say, boy, couldn't I live? I wish I could live more than one lifetime. I would be so different. My feeling is if most people lived another life, they'd do the same thing all over again and all over again until they get to the bottom of what we're talking about here. Because in this show, how we separate ourselves from everything else, and I've been called the alternative to the alternative media. And that was something that I think it was Daryl Eberhardt who gave me that title, because we go beyond what the alternative media does and get to the bottom. And like I say, the truth starts here. And it's an opinion show. It's not a news show. If you want to find out what happened, a fire took place, you want to find out breaking news. This isn't a breaking news show. So you're going to get an opinion. You're going to get something that's different. You're going to get, and there are shows like this. But what's happened is it can't be done in the mainstream. And let me explain why. When I first started out as a journalist back in it was the late mid-70s, 80s, 70s, I believed that there was freedom of the press, and nothing more than I wanted to do than work for a newspaper and report stories to people. Now, in our system, you got all these newspapers that are putting out news and then mixing in opinion, and you never know where they stand. So I was basically a news reporter, and I realized that if you said a certain thing, if I had certain views, certain opinion, and if I could slant a story some way, I could do that. And if I was working for a liberal paper, most papers are, by the way, conservative views back when I started were considered taboo. And that's a switch that has gone on over the over 40, 50 years. We have seen something very different in the conservative and the liberal movements. And really, I was hoodwinked. But in our system, basically, you have all these newspapers, all these, as CNN calls itself a news station. That's not a news. They are geared towards the left, and they're going to present stories cloaked with left-wing and even socialist views now. This kind of idea of, and they will protect the Vatican. All of it all boils down. Every place I've ever worked in the mainstream protects the Vatican. You want to try to go up against them, forget about it. Now we've done stories you can't even do it in the courts. We just had John Levy on yesterday telling us all that. Go to my show yesterday if you want to see what the courts are about and when you get involved with the Vatican. So you get into American journalism, and when I first started out, okay, go to this paper. I'd go, for example, working in Naples, Florida, it was more of a smaller newspaper at the time that was concentrating on local news, but yet then they had an editorial staff that was kind of they would talk about conservative views. Now, then again, if you go to like a paper I was going to get hired on in Nashville, that was a very conservative paper. Then I got a job up in Michigan, and that was a liberal paper, cloaked in news. So what I'm saying is news and opinion, you were taught that you do not have an opinion if you're a journalist. And newspapers are fair, and they give both sides of the stories. But what you find out at the top levels, they have always had leanings either left or right, and all of their stories, most of their stories, would be slanted towards their political, social, religious views. So it's basically a scam when you really boils down to it. And when I first went to Rome as a correspondent there and was given a taste of foreign, or at least during the 80s, a taste of Italian, the way they covered stories. It was, to me, foreign at the time, but it was quite interesting. They had every separate newspaper there. For example, there was a newspaper that you knew was Christian Democrat. There was a newspaper you knew was communist. There was a newspaper you knew was kind of in the middle. So what I'm getting at is all of the views. When you went to read what was it? God, there was so many of them. I can't even remember. Corriere della Sera. You knew that you were going to get stories, and their views were all supporting America and Christian Democrats and all of the anti-communists. If you went to the other newspaper, for example, there was the Il Messaggero, the La Repubblica, all these things, and you knew each one. Really, I mean, I go to an Italian that was just reading, and he goes, I know if I go to that newspaper, I'm going to get the communist view. If I go to this newspaper, I'm going to get the Christian Democrat view. I go to this one, I'm going to get the socialist view. So it was all pretty well spelled out, and people knew it. I think that's better in a sense. And really, American journalism has evolved into that, but we don't live up to that. We kind of fool ourselves. And the people, thus, especially when the internet came out, said, we don't trust the press anymore. We don't trust the mainstream press. They're lying to us. And really, all they're really doing, yes, they are lying to you, because they're calling themselves news outlets, which should be something that you just go to get what happened today without some kind of sprinkled opinion in there that's going to lead you in a certain way. So yeah, you'd say, God, this story, You can go story after story. I mean, look at the news today. Let me give you an example. Katie Couric, obviously working for the social. I mean, she's a socialist Democrat, and she comes off. She was the nightly news report. Oh, I'm giving you the whole story. BS. So she does a special on some channel about gun control, and you know their agenda is to get rid of all guns and to take away guns so they can take over this country. But she presents gun control, and she brings on some gun advocates, and they ask her. She asks some kind of question about whatever the question was. It was geared towards, well, what would you do if there wasn't background checks? And they look at the two gun proponents, and they didn't say anything for 10 seconds. They looked dumbfounded. And we find out that was edited in. That's not the way it went. So they really were slanting their story towards getting rid of guns. So why don't they just come out and say the truth, who they are? That's the deception in the American media that we see today. And that's why people have grown so weary of it. And that's why Trump gets away with all this stuff. I mean, he's one of the first people. He comes out calling ABC a sleazy organization. And most Americans will agree with him, because many people are catching on to the fact that they're not getting just news. They're getting slanted, deceptive stories by newspapers. For example, the New York Times. I'll give you an example. When I was researching as an independent journalist 9/11, and the New York Times came out with a book, two of their top reporters, the 160 Minutes, the real truth about what went on in the Twin Towers. And when I saw all the discrepancies there and read that book that was sold, these two journalists who were the ones set out to tell you the truth, when I tried to get to the bottom, interview them, go to the top saying, hey, you're missing some things here. They were so protective, I couldn't get through to them. They were like, oh, talk to our media relations. And, the final thing is we stand by our story. So I dug a little deeper and found out that the New York Times has a number of actually covert CIA agents working there. So you know what their agenda is. It's going to, if I want to call it, it's going to be the neocon, New World Order agenda pushing towards globalism. That's it. And the New York Times tries to get away as this bastion of freedom, and the paper's going to hell in a handbasket now under the leadership they have there, and so you get nothing, and people have become weary of this. It is true that most of the mainstream doesn't give conservative views, doesn't give strong Christian views a fair shake. Trump is right when he says those things. And what you're seeing, Americans coming awake. So as a journalist, what do when I look at it, I go, okay, I want to differentiate news from opinion. And once you start research, so I said to myself, why should I even work for these papers? Once I started to, unless, for example, when I first started, I realized journalism profession was very low paid. So there was just more to money. I didn't get into it to make a lot of money. I get into it because I wanted to learn the truth and tell the truth to people. But you can't do it in the American system, in the mainstream. You couldn't do it then. And I had to learn the hard way. And guess what? I learned it by going to a foreign country who, in a sense, we look down upon. Oh, they don't have freedom of anything. You know what? At least when you picked up at the Corriere della Sera, they didn't lie. They told you exactly what their opinions were, and you knew the news was slanted towards their point of view, and everybody knew that. So if you wanted to read that, go ahead. Then when you want to read the communist view, you go to the other communist paper. And if you want to read a centrist view, you want to read a socialist view, you go to those, and they were right there, and you got to know them all. So basically, you had a job. You had to go to each, and every paper basically didn't pull any punches. That was their view, and their stories were slanted, and they told you that. Okay, what's better? In my mind, it's better that you realize at least, you might not agree with their opinions, but at least they told you the truth on who they were most of the time. Now, I'm sure there's a little bit of, foul play going on. When you get the CIA involved in this and their influence, man, I realize. So I'm working for the American newspaper there as well. And one morning, I told you the story many times. You can go to UPI 1982, American newspaper bombed. You can get my name there. I was almost killed in a terrorist attack. Back then, they were doing regional terrorism there, testing it out for their global terrorism they're doing today. And so I was almost killed in that. It made me figure out how did they get in there? How did they get this bomb in the American newspaper? Me and this other guy were the only ones there, and they must have cased the joint out at 7:30 in the morning. And if I was in that hallway 10 seconds later, I'd have been gone. So it made me research. Where is it? So I find out the American newspaper is owned by the CIA. Here we are spreading, the American view. And it really was run by the CIA. Now, secondly, you try to get stories regarding I was learning some things about the Vatican, and there were a few other journalists too around. Now, you tried to get these stories over to the States through the only outlet you had. If you didn't work for, well, it wouldn't have mattered if you worked for any newspaper in the States. Back then, things were changing. Back then, UPI and AP were basically the outlet, and newspapers were cutting back. They didn't want foreign correspondents. They used to be, when journalists back in the time of Hemingway, they would be working for the Kansas City paper, and they'd send them to be the foreign correspondent. You get more truth that way. They cut that out. So you go to UPI, AP, that's your big, that's where, the wire services. And newspapers subscribe to wire services. Many poorer, smaller newspapers that can't afford this, they subscribe to get foreign news, or news from, let's say, Los Angeles, if you have a small paper in Texas. You get it through the wires, and you pay for that. And I remember when I owned my small little newspaper, that's what I would do. However, I realized, even when I did that, I knew this was slanted, because when I was trying to get stories out to the American people during the 80s regarding the Vatican bank scandal and certain things were involving the Vatican and the CIA and all this stuff, they would never make it out of Rome. So the point I'm trying to get is, how free is that? And guess what? The guy who was running the bureau, I could never prove this, but he had to have CIA contact, and control as well. Now you start getting to that point, and I realized I probably would have been killed there if I really wanted to push it. And I can't even think of all the agents I must have talked to there thinking they were other people. And when I look back at it, it's just amazing. And I've talked about this to a friend of mine, an actor friend of mine there, who we've met on film sets when we used to do that to make some money. And he agrees, totally. And, I look back at Italy now, and it's changing. It's almost morphing into what we have here. They don't, all of a sudden, the Christian Democratic Party there doesn't exist the way it did. And in the next half hour, I'll get into really what is going on all these cable news shows that you get now on the mainstream, what's going on in the mainstream alternative area, and what's going on the opinion fringe groups. When I say fringe, I mean people that are out here in the internet really knowing and getting at the truth and how they've been discredited. So we'll get to that in the second half hour. Hope this helps set it up, because, all it is brainwashing, and you got to figure this out. So we'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Okay, we are back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com, and this is the Investigative Journal. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. Been doing this show for about 10, 11 years now, and boy, those years go by. I'd rather not even think about it sometimes. But anyway, we have never strayed away from what this show is really about, and I can say it in a few words. The Vatican-led New World Order. We all know what the Vatican is, and we all know what the New World Order is today, and that's what this show's about. So let me explain. The advent of when I first started out in this business, all these cable shows weren't around. You basically got your news and slanted news from newspapers, and you actually read. There was no visuals. And then you would watch maybe ABC, NBC, or CBS. There were 3 stations. And then as time passed, CNN came along and the television just blossomed. And we got more cable news networks than Carter has pills. And what they do, so what we have here now is this movement away, television movement away was starting out as I was growing up. But still, I grew up reading more newspapers than most people don't even read them anymore. Occasionally in the coffee shop, I see somebody and I say, "Oh, you're one of the last of the Mohicans here. You still read a newspaper," and it's usually somebody that's a baby boomer or older. So this advent of television made everything visual, made it easy. Then, of course, the internet came. Now, let's stop with that. So let's look at the tube. And what do you get there? All of a sudden, all these opinion, what they call them cable news shows. So basically, they were not being honest with you there. Then, kind of as the years, so you had cable news shows like MSNBC, NBC has one, CBS, all these, and then you had CNN, then you had Fox, and you had these huge cable news shows. That's what they said, cable news. Then you had to figure out, okay, if I go to Bill O'Reilly, which he proclaims to be the biggest cable news show for the last 15 years and running, and the guy's a rich millionaire over this stuff. Now O'Reilly, and I'll use him as an example. So you go to him, and if you go to Fox, now you're getting the idea as years pass. You're getting a very conservative point of view here. You're not getting the liberal CNN view and all of their cable news shows, and I put news in quotes. So, and then you go to MSNBC, which appears to be even more into the neocon camp. So you know that if you go to these, you're going to get that. Now, the question becomes, and we're just going to stick with TV right now. Let's use O'Reilly as an example. He's on every night, and there's other followers of his, like the Kelly File, Bagan Kelly, who does a conservative. So I'm going to use that word conservative just to make it to generalize here. And then you got Hannity, all these guys. So you're getting that Republican view, and you're getting their slant. Now O'Reilly likes to say that the spin stops here, okay? And he's going to give you his view, but he's going to be fair, and he's going to do both Clinton. So he tries to be giving you his view, which when you go to him, and then he's going to try to fairly give the other side of the neocons. This is in the mainstream, overlooking anything and basically making anybody that does opinion shows that go beyond either the left or right paradigm in America as conspiracy theorists and nuts, and that is not given a fair shake in a show. In fact, it tells me that the only debate he's doing is between a corrupted American system, between the left and the right, playing the Hegelian dialectic, covering for the Vatican, and covering for the real truth. So that's what you're getting there. And so he's going to make anybody else on the internet, including people like Alex Jones, who are covert ops, trying to keep away a lot of the news from you when you go to the internet to get the truth, working for them. He'll throw him into the barrel too, along with me, if that ever came up, or anybody like me. And that's not even given that's given a laugh on his show. Now you go to CNN and they'll do the same thing. Their guys will be a little more smooth, and they will be, more entertaining. You got, Anderson Cooper and Don Lemon. And, I have to watch this. And I know a lot of the people listening to this show get turned off on that, but you got to watch what these guys do. And it isn't going to take that much out of your life. I mean, you got to see how this works. And you can if you just ignore it. And I can understand why, because when I first started to figure this out, I didn't want to even listen to a president's voice. I didn't want to listen to any of this because it just was revolting. But after you get over that, you say, boy, I can learn something here. So CNN's doing, so all these cable news networks are playing this Hegelian dialectic game with you. They're giving you, on CNN, you're going to get a more socialist, democratic view. And then they're going to try to say, well, we're going to also cover the right. But again, and they go a little bit farther, they're promoting their view. So we got everything visual, which to me is the basis of mind control, and it's not good. And I'll explain that in a minute. Not good solely to get your news that way, just through having them present pictures to you along with their words, because that is very, very, that can be very, very well, basically brainwashing you with this stuff. That gets ingrained in your mind. And you'll know that from even the first political ad that started to use this brainwashing technique was when Lyndon Johnson ran for president. And he was trying to beat up this, and it reminds me of what's going on today, this outside candidate, Barry Goldwater, who had all these, what they were considered radical views, and maybe he's going to get us into war. Everybody's saying that about Trump right now. And they presented one of the first TVs, it was in black and white, was called the Daisy commercial. And they presented this little girl counting daisies, 1, 10 daisies, 9 daisies, and then it morphed into a bomb count, 10, 9, 8, and then you saw the big mushroom cloud. There wasn't any words, but everybody knew they were talking about Goldwater and the fear that he may get us into war. And what they said was, oh, it caused outrage. Outrage. The New York Times came out and said things like, this is terror, this can't be, this is the war. But here's what happened. They were, even conservative groups were forcing, liberal groups, they were calling to pull this ad. Now, before they even ran it, Johnson supposedly said, that's okay, run it one time and then we'll let the media do our work. So that thing ran, they paid for one ad, and then the media replayed it 100,000 times saying how bad it was. That to me was the beginning, at least in modern politics, of what they do. And so you're getting all your information from, now you go to CNN, it's more of a right point of view, a leftist point of view, and they're going to tell you they cover the right as well. And then MSNBC does it a little different, et cetera, et cetera. But what they don't go any farther than that. And they will also depict anybody that presents anything that you'll get on the internet. When you go back to stories like we do, Vatican-led New World Order, the Jesuit Foundation of America, the American history being, all this stuff, and presenting solid cases, even when you go to cases in court, like the Alamo case, like Alpern v. Vatican Bank, when we talk about the money laundering in the Vatican and how they were involved in the genocide. These stories do, and that's considered conspiracy theory, but it is a federal court case. So that tells me that they really have an agenda. And their agenda. They're going to play the left-right paradigm, and they're going to never give you the truth. Either Bill O'Reilly, when he says, I say the spin starts there, and when you go to CNN, all you're getting is the left point of view emphasized, and they tell you they're going to be honest and cover the right too. But they don't go any farther than that. And we know in America that is a mistake. Now, so the internet comes into play. Well, let me stop before I get into the internet, because I got about 15 minutes. I've seen a shift. Even, let's talk about the paradigm, the left-right paradigm in America. The Republican Party today, first of all, the Democratic Party in America has always been depicted as a party of freedom. It isn't. It was one of the most treacherous. The Democratic Party remember Tammany Hall in New York? Remember, they were a slave party. This party has completely reversed itself. The Republican Party of Lincoln was the party of real freedom, and they've depicted the Republican Party as these conservative, stodgy Christians that don't have an idea of really where America's going. Well, what's really happened to me, the Democratic Party is the most deceitful party. I mean, the Republican Party does its share, and it's all a paradigm. But I want you to know that if you really look into what the Democratic Party was, it isn't what it's claimed to be. We learned about it as Kennedy, the Freedom Party. It was the most tyrannical party, if history be known, that existed. Now, what's happened is we've gotten in our mind that the Democratic Party is for freedom, the Republican Party is stodgy and backward, right? Conservative views, never, and that's what they tell you today. Now listen to this. Both parties have now shifted. They're not the same as they were in the 60s and the 70s. The Democrats have moved to a neocon socialist idea of every big government, so big, taking over every one of your rights, and it's a globalist party. It isn't a party of the people. It isn't a party of nationalism and freedom in this country. It's a party of oppression using all of these tactics, like I mentioned, of brainwashing, of telling you something, pictures on TV, you see something, you believe it. They are using, and you're seeing the shift now. Look at Bernie Sanders. They're telling you he's a socialist. Look at his views. He wants to bring everything under the arm of the government. Then we have the Republican Party, which is now shifting to this kind of centrist, more this liberal party, and not the one that's espousing Christian views, strong conservative views that many people in America still adhere to. But where are these other views going, these strong Christian principles, these strong views about morality and the Bible? These are all being placed in a category of archaic, crazy, and let's not move there. That's what Trump is all about. He's moving us into a different direction. So people are either going to take the worst, most people are seeing a shift not only in the candidates, their positions, but also the parties are different today. And that's where we're moving. So we got to look at that. And that is what's expressed on your mainstream. Now, if you go farther and you start telling the truth beyond these two parties, beyond all of the things that we get only in those stations, you're considered a conspiracy theorist. They've got this all mapped out, because when the internet began, that was an interesting idea. All the mainstream papers, all of the networks, and all of these opinion shows, cable shows, are all on the internet now. They all use the internet. They're all there, so you can get it there as well. Then we have what I call the controlled internet, the controlled internet by people like Alex Jones and David Icke and Jeff Rentz and John Stadtmiller and Genesis Broadcasting and Republic Broadcasting. They are presenting this kind of, Greg's right when he talks about the paradigm of left and right and all of this stuff, and there's really more. The government's out to kill you, and they present all of these views, but and many people go to them. And I worked with these stations because what I found is I could no longer work in the mainstream because I realized it was a crock of what. So I move over to the internet, work with these bigger stations, and find out that they're controlled as well. Because when you want, and the way I found it out was because I lived in Rome and I worked in the Vatican, and I wanted that story told here. When that happened, I was ostracized. They started spreading rumors that I was some kind of agent of the CIA and all this kind of stuff. And even in a little town I lived in Colorado, a person that was perusing the internet one time in the library, and I knew him, I walked by and he's got an Alex Jones article and he's reading about me being some kind of covert agent. And he looked at me and he said, "I didn't realize this was you." And I said, "Are you going to believe Alex Jones?" And I think he did. So the reason that was spread, those rumors were spread by those people, is they were also covering up for the story that we tell on this show, and others that try to get to the bottom of the Vatican. Tony Alamo's one, Tupper Saucy was one. Then you have some other shows out there, very small shows, that are trying to do the same thing. Now, let's piece this together. So when you go to Alex Jones, he's going to tell you or you go to Jeff Rentz and all these people, they're going to tell you that they're going to give you the truth, nothing but the truth. John Stadtmiller and Republic are going to do the same thing. They go a little farther then, and they open the paradigm up a little bit. And people like Ron Paul, stuff like that, with them. In fact, they'll go on Alex Jones' show. He'll get those kind of people. But the real dividing line is they only go so far. And they're there to cover up the real stories of what I call the alternative to the alternative. So when you go to those stations, you got to figure out who those people are. Then you're going to see that they're going to go so far, but they're going to leave out really important information regarding when you bring the spiritual and the secular world together, and the control, really, where does it lie with the Vatican and all of their tentacles. And I'm not saying, you see, they're going to debate things on their show, comparing their stuff to the mainstream, blah, blah, blah. But they will now, when I wanted to bring up this side of the story, which is another, I'm an opinion show that deals with this. I said, why cannot we bring this on the table and talk about it just like you talk about other things? When you compare your show to the mainstream shows like O'Reilly and the mainstream press, bring this, because we're talking about a whole different story here. And then they don't want to do that. They don't want to go there. And that tells me that the truth lies in what's not said. And that's where you go. So when you go to those shows, no, they will keep this stuff out. They will even call me crazy. That's what they used to do. And the reason is they were put there to take you so far, but never allow you to get to this point. Now, the people that I have on my show have gotten to this point. Many of them former Catholic priests and high level of the Vatican. I remember doing a show with the Archbishop of Guatemala, a number of priests who have defected and told the truth, some nuns who have told the truth. Then you get to people like Tony Alamo who have been jailed for this. Then you get to people like Daniel Smith and other people who are trying to get to natural medicines that come really up against these people, as well as, you get into people like, I got into them years ago with Leonard Horowitz and his group when they were trying to cover the AIDS story that was false. And a lot of stuff he did. Oh, did they attack me and the people that I had on my show? Because they were controlling the AIDS debate. And I used to bring on another guy who really, you got to go back. I can't even remember some of the shows. They were so technical. And the guy from Colorado that I used to have on, boy, did he understand what was really going on in the medical profession regarding AIDS. And boy, when we were doing that, you saw that group. And then I also noticed those people were also on the Alex Jones show. All these people that were kind of, when you start really getting to the truth of medicine, natural cures, when you try to get to the cures of your soul, the spiritual cures, you got to come up against this group. And most of the people on the internet don't do that. So you got to know who they are and how far they go. So what I tell you is we're honest here. We go all the way, and I want to bring you these stories regarding the Vatican-led New World Order, compare them to what you get with people like Alex Jones and Jeff Rense, and then compare it to what you get with people like Bill O'Reilly and Anderson Cooper on CNN. Then you're getting a complete rounded opinion of everything, and you're able to know. So that's what you'll get here. Very simple. And they don't like it, because I realize that the whole thing is to cover up this story. Because once you get to this point, it opens up a door that you keep walking through, and you're gonna find more and more truth. You're gonna find more truth in your history books that have been deleted. You're gonna find more truth in what's really going on in natural cures and health, what's going on in chemtrails, where it comes from when you talk about the ecumenical movement, where it comes from when you talk about the finances, the connections that all go to Rome. And if you leave that out, you have a big problem. You're not getting the whole story. So don't listen to those people that tell you they're giving you everything. The spin stops here with Bill O'Reilly. Alex Jones telling you this is the, the info wars. This is the prison planet. And I'm telling you these guys are crazy over there on the left and the right. But he's not going this far. And he won't, because he can't. Because the money's coming from people up there that don't want the Jesuit, the Vatican story ever told. Like they used to tell back in the 15, 16, 17, 18, 19th centuries, even back 50 years ago, there were people on the 60s, 70s, people on the pulpits telling you the truth about this beast, how she got into this country. So remember that. And I hope you want to go farther. And maybe there's even another layer that we can get to. But the more I dig into this story, the more it all goes back to Rome. And tomorrow, I think what we'll do, I only got a couple minutes, I want to talk about the American Revolution for a minute. So we're going to concentrate on 1776 to 1800, then go back to the 1600s, and I'll do it in about a half hour because I've done many shows on this, showing you that America was not founded for the purposes that you think. And we'll talk about that in general and how the Vatican played a part in this and European dictators. And then I want to also get into the 7 agendas of chemtrails. We can do that in a half hour. What's your interest? The real 7 agendas of chemtrails and what it's all about. Talking about things that we've talked about for 10 years. And calling on a couple areas of research done by people that have really been looking into this. And it's more devastating than you really think. And there's more to it than just the chemicals in the air filtering down. Now, that's enough to poison you, the animals, and all of the plants. There's a lot more to it. And like they say, if you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, you're better off, right? They're killing not 2 birds, they're killing 10 birds with 1 stone with chemtrails. And so come back and listen to that. Folks, I want to emphasize so much the Catholic influence in America and how it began way before you think. How it began on November 22nd, 1633, with 2 ships sailing here from Maryland called the Ark and the Dove. Well, we can talk about that till the cows come home. And you're never going to hear it other places. You're never going to hear it on Bill O'Reilly. You're never going to. And these are, they talk about, with those shows, they talk about the Pope as he's some kind of hero. So they work for him. Now you go to Alex Jones, and when I first started talking about the Pope, or the Vatican, he said I was crazy. Now he's gotten on their bandwagon and says, this new Pope is evil. And so what they're doing is they're playing a game that there's good and bad in the Vatican. He's not giving you the whole story. And he wants you to listen to him and not get the truth. But there is no good in that at top level of that organization. And from the beginnings, there have never been. And so you got to look at it from that point of view. So don't be brainwashed. I didn't get into what I wanted to do and talk about how important it is to read and create your own images in your mind and not just take everything from YouTube not that there isn't good stuff or everything from the TV. You got to mix it together and create your own images. It helps you to be not brainwashed. So anyway, we'll be back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.